I want to welcome you here this evening. My name is Patrick Gannon. I have the pleasure of serving as the president for the Downtown Sarasota Condo Association. And so the DSCA is pleased to host this workshop on hurricane emergency preparedness and remediation. And in doing this, one of the reasons we picked this time of year to do this workshop is that in a couple of weeks, June 1st, hurricane season starts. And so if there's any no better time to be sure that you've got all your plans in place and everything for begin your preparations, is now is the time. And so we were very fortunate to be able to put together a panel here. And we're going to do something rather unique tonight. Instead of just one set of panelists, we kind of have our dueling panelists here, so to speak. We have representatives from different activities related to the condo management, condo boards, and then a set of professionals, industry professionals with different expertise that can be applied to helping you in your preparations, and also when disaster or storms occur, remediation and dealing with those aspects for that. So again, so I want to mention thank our sponsors. I hope you had a chance to visit their tables in the back, and afterwards, after they do the giveaways, there'll be still time to do a little visiting. When we go through the process today, we'll be doing some questions back and forth between the condo representatives as well as the industry specialists. And then, with time permitting, we'll take questions from the audience. And so Bridget here in the center has got the 3x5 card. So as we go through this, if something is mentioned and you didn't quite understand or want more information, you can fill out a 3x5 card. We'll pick those up, and then I'll read those off and direct them to different panelists. So please take an opportunity if you have some questions that don't get answered during the presentation discussion. Fill that out, and we'll come back and pick those up before the session's over here. Let me quickly go through and introduce our panelists here. Representing the condo representatives, we have Brian Heatherton from Associate Gulf Coast. Raise your hand there. And then John Vetri from Plaza at 5 Points. Jason Dirth from the Saravan Condo. Frank Berkey from the Marina Tower Condo. Mel Sykes is on the board at 1350 Main. And Bob Perolo is a board member from the Broadway Promenade Condo. For our industry specialists, we're very glad to have here this evening, helping to kick that off, Todd Kirkering, who is the City of Sarasota Emergency Manager. And then also representing, I'm out of order here, sorry. Derek Maginus from Norton Hammersley Law Firm. Then we have Matthew Mercier from CBiz Association Insurance. Rick Holleran from Sable Palm Bank. Curtis Ross from Snell Engineering. Then Darren Caldwell from Brightway Emergency Services. So this is our panelists for the evening here. First of all, I have a question to start off from the audience here. How many of you were in residence here around September 8th or 9th last year? And how many of you were in your condo on September 11th or 10th? Okay, a few of you hung in there. For those of us who had the experience of living through that, it was a quite interesting opportunity. And for those condos who actually had the emergency preparedness plans, hurricane preparedness plans, it turned out to be a good opportunity to see how well it worked. And from that, the Downtown Sarasota Condo Association gathered responses last fall in October, November, and we actually published a set of kind of lessons learned. And so there's a lot of those lessons learned. So now this is an opportunity to take the experiences learned from that and have some dialogue here about how we should go about updating that. And so what I'd like to kick off here, let me start with Bob Perolo. Bob, with your experiences, and what were some of your takeaways, and what other questions would you want to direct to the panelists here?
The biggest issue I had is when they announced the mandatory evacuation and the staff left. Somehow, we sort of thought the staff would want to stick around because they loved us so much. But essentially, they were gone, and the other part of that is the staff weren't completely familiar with the building and its hurricane rating. So people were going up and asking them, are the doors hurricane proof, are the windows hurricane proof, are they rated for a hurricane category 3? And one of the staff was saying, no, it's not rated for hurricane. So then you had people panicking, and then they were moving out of the building, and then we had to try to do a little bit of a education of the staff very quickly before they abandoned us. And then I wound up spending time at the front desk, and we did manage to keep a security guy in for 3 days, and that helped us a lot. But the biggest panic I had, there was that momentary pause when the staff actually left, and we were all on our own.
So what would be some of the preparation advice you might give to the condo association to be sure they've got things lined up? Anyone
Take all the cars away from the
take
staff.
that? Here's a microphone here if you want to pass it down for it.
I think the best thing to do is make sure you have an emergency service plan ahead of time. There's companies like us that will come out there and actually do a full assessment of your properties. That way you don't have to worry, even if your staff leaves, we'll be there for you. We'll know where we can communicate with you. We actually deploy satellite phones out so that we can communicate. And that way, even if you're out of state, we can actually show you pictures of what's going on at the units. And it's definitely one of those things to plan for ahead of time. The time it happens, you're not going to find an emergency contractor, and you're not going to find staff. They're all gone. So pre-arrange it.
So Curtis, are there some structural things that they should have had lined up and documented or something ahead of time so that this information was written down and people know?
Yeah. So having, I think generally the biggest impact during the storm afterwards is typically not maybe turning into missile, but certainly water infiltration. That tends to be the biggest one. So making sure that windows are properly sealed and doorways are properly sealed and that cracks are covered properly. I mean, those are things that can't be done. It's kind of a last minute thing. So making sure that those inspections are happening periodically on as scheduled. You know, if it's a year or every 2 years or 3 years that the association chooses to do that, but making sure that those happen and that they're thorough, because you know it isn't working after the water comes in. And certainly that's something that can be helped.
Okay, I appreciate that. You have a follow-up, Bob?
Just a quick question on satellite phones. Would you recommend buying one or renting one? Our thought is to maybe, when a storm is announced, we'll just run out and rent a phone for 2 or 3 weeks.
You want to do it ahead of time, and you definitely can rent it. One of the other things, we have an ES plan set up ahead of time. You'd have somebody that's probably out of state that you can get a hold of, and we recommend that as part of an emergency service plan, that you have somebody that, you definitely would have somebody in most associations that's going to be gone anyway, and they're always your backup. But I would rent, even as a major, we're the largest emergency service contractor in the area, we rent them, because we're going to rent about 20 of them at a time. So I wouldn't recommend having one all the time.
And can I add something as well? From an insurance standpoint, what we do annually for our clients is we go out there prior to hurricane season and take timestamp pictures and video of the property. We also take the drone out and get an aerial view, because when the disaster does come, when Hurricane Jimmy does come, not to pick on you, Jimmy, but when Hurricane Jimmy does come, having that documentation to an adjuster who's not from this area, because what happens is the catastrophic adjusters aren't from Sarasota, Florida, they're from outside the state. If you can paint the picture on what the property looked like prior to the loss, it helps adjust the claim a lot quicker. So annually, get your agent out to property to take timestamp pictures and video of the property. It's a must.
Thank you. Okay. Mel, what is your experience? There's some questions you might have.
Well, we had our manager stayed, our maintenance supervisor stayed, and we had a concierge that helped us. So we had coverage staff-wise. My personal preference would have been everyone leave and we lock the door. We were in a unique situation in the last year. We were in 2 flood zones, A and B. So that, I think, gave people incentive to stay when they probably should have left. And that was, fortunately, everything turned out all right. So when we had a doctor in the building, we also had 2 nurses. So if there had been a medical emergency, at least we would have had that care. One of the things unexpected happened, though, is some of our residents brought in friends and neighbors, our friends and family, rather, from the barrier islands. So we had refugees in the building. And so my question is, what legal liability or other considerations are involved, especially when you have mandatory evacuation, when you have outsiders coming in?
Jared, you want to take that to the...
Jimmy? I mean, that's an extensive list. So if your question is if there's a mandatory evacuation, what are your legal liabilities?
Our legal liability, especially with outsiders, non-residents coming in the building. Hopefully we accounted for all those. We think we did, but.
Well, I mean, this goes back to your hurricane preparedness list. What my recommendation is to the board is, for associations that I represent, every single year we go through and we make sure that we have a hurricane preparedness plan, so that we know when each situation comes up, there's written guidelines on who's responsible for what and how we're going to react. If there's a mandatory evacuation, is somebody allowed to stay? If they are, who's that person that's designated to stay, and what are their responsibilities if they stay? The reason this is important is because you want to protect the property as much as you can, because really it comes down to what expenses are going to be. You know, life, of course, is first, safety is first, but the board has a duty to protect the association property. So you want to make a determination from the get-go. What are our responsibilities on the board? What is the condo association's responsibilities? And you want to have them listed out. And of course you want to have everybody come out, like you want to have Darren come out and make an assessment of how do we properly protect this. Windows are a very specific item. You know, associations today are allowed to have hurricane-proof windows. Well, let's say that there's a unit owner that wants to put up shutters. You can't prevent them from putting up shutters, but you got to make sure that they're doing things correctly. So, you know, I had kind of a funny story. A buddy of mine built a house out in Lakewood Ranch, and he was putting up his shutters, and he got stuck on his balcony because it was screened in, and he couldn't put the last shutter on, which became a danger because if the wind hit, it was going to rip the other shutters off. So it was really kind of useless. So there are major responsibilities that you want to go through and make sure that everybody's identified, who's responsible, and how we're going to make that happen. When the mandatory evacuation happens, you want to go through, make sure that everybody knows. You should have updated contact information. And this is all part of your plan. You want to make sure that the residents have provided you, you know, it is your responsibility to say, hey, look, provide us with this. It should always be updated anyway, and that you have a list that you can contact these people. Let everybody know, hey, there is a mandatory evacuation. We're going to be leaving at this time, and if you stay, you're on your own. With regards to liability, the simple answer is that anybody can sue anybody at any time. So, no matter what steps you take, there's always going to be that question. But if you take reasonable steps to ensure that people are doing what they're supposed to do, that you've given reasonable notice, and nobody can come in and say, well, why didn't you do this or why didn't you do that? And you have a document that says, here's what our plan is, here's what we're doing, I think you're going to be fine.
I'll add to that too.
I'd like to add to that, because I was in the same situation. We were totally prepared. We had all our ducks in a row. We were totally ready. Saturday, however, our people who were up north called their friends from the barrier islands, just as Mel said, were coming in. How do you turn people away when it's 24 hours or less before a hurricane? They're showing up with their family and their dog, and they have permission to stay in the unit owner's unit, who's somewhere in Ohio or New England, and you've got this entire family showing up, and they have access to that unit, they're allowed to go to that unit, and now they become our responsibility to take care of during the hurricane and after the hurricane. They're not quite prepared. It adds a lot of burden to the staff, because we have plenty of staff there. We invite our staff and their families to come stay in the building, because I certainly don't want to leave my family behind while I'm at work, so I bring my entire family, including grandchildren. So I had all my family accounted for, but we didn't account for over 50 people from the barrier island showing up unprepared, just like gangbusters. We didn't have places to park them all, and it was quite the nightmare. So we had our choice: turn them away or accommodate. And in that situation, with less than 24 hours before a hurricane, we had to accommodate.
And I would add to that. If you could put a rule in place where the owner physically has to be on property in order to have folks there, I think that would help from a liability standpoint. But that's the only thing I would add. Now, if the individual owners are staying on site, they're inviting their family or friends over to their unit to stay, it's on them. But to your point, it creates a nightmare when you have a bunch of people coming last minute. So that's something, if anybody could take away, that is something you need to take away, to have a game plan for the folks that aren't on the list.
Yeah, I think our biggest issue at Sarasota, to tack on to the same thing when you have people that remain behind, was not so much people coming in. Most of the people who had already left were gone. It was the people who remained behind. Part of the biggest thing that we look for and that we had a challenge with, we had a plan in place and we had been approached earlier, we had developed somewhat of a plan, and we're continuing to work on that. But the issue we had were residents who were more ambulatory, who didn't have many options to get out of the building. Looking into the city planning and what was available to them, that in developing our plan, that's where we're kind of at a snag. What can you do, and what's our responsibility as an association to those residents who have a hard time getting out of the building, if it's because of medical reasons or whatever it may be? Because when you look at their options that are available to them, 9 times out of 10, their option looks better to stay in that building. This is a mandatory evacuation. We're right on the bay, but their best looking option is to stay in the building. What options are better than that for those residents?
Well, I mean, I know. Go ahead.
If I could just add to
One thing
that.
I wanted to add real quick was, okay, if you have people coming in, and I guess it would depend on whether or not it's been declared a disaster area. I know a lot of times before the hurricane hits, they go ahead and they do that prior to. When I was in the National Guard, we always ramped up beforehand, and then we went out and we staged. But if you look at Florida Statute 718-1625, there are provisions in there that once it's declared a disaster area, you have these emergency powers. And those emergency powers, they give the association the right to prevent entry to anybody, even the unit owners, their family, their guests, their friends. So you can make that determination and you're going to be protected. With regards to the people who need ambulatory evacuations, that should always be part of your preparedness plan. Okay, we know we have people that live here and they're in wheelchairs or this or that, so you can contract with somebody beforehand, and if you know a hurricane's coming and you feel like it's going to hit, you can utilize those services to get them out beforehand. So, I mean, that's just something that should be in your plan.
I had been in healthcare for several years prior to Condo, and we used to have through the County of Sarasota a special needs program where they would pre-register, and then they would be picked up shortly, a day or so before the hurricanes. That program's still in effect.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. That program is still in effect. They're changing the People with Special Needs program, the county, this year to a medically dependent program, meaning that you need to meet certain requirements in order to be part of it. Simply say, I'm oxygen dependent. Not just because you're in a wheelchair, but you're oxygen dependent. You can sign up with the county on that program. The county has also developed a transportation program. So any of the folks that have limited transportation means they can sign up for the county now. The county will come and pick them up in a scat bus, and they will take them to a shelter. It's not the shelter you want to go to, it's the shelter that they have designated that you're going to. Now, here in the city, we have 3 shelters that the county is going to run. We have Booker High School up off Myrtle, we have Southside Elementary, and we have Brookside Middle. Those are the only 3 shelters that will be here in the city. The other shelters, you can look further south, the Riverview High School and some of the others, but those are the only 3 shelters. The medically dependent shelters, they do not advertise where those shelters are. You have to be part of the program, and then they will either come and pick you up, or your significant other or a caregiver can drive you to that shelter. That is the only thing. Now, when it comes back on some of the things of mandatory evacuation, I can tell you if we announce that, that's great, but we're not coming door to door to make sure that you left. We don't have the time to do that. And hitting on some of these other things of friends and neighbors coming,
because they live on the barrier islands. Well, this is a problem that they're going to have, is that they come to your condo, this area that they do not have a driver's license for, and then they decide, well, I'm going to go out and view the damage, but now this area is blocked off and secured that we're only letting residents in. They're going to show their driver's license and you're not a resident there. Well, my friends let me use their condo. You're not a resident. You can either turn around and leave, or you can get the silver bracelets put on your hands and wrists. You know, that's as simple as I can put it. So, you know, your friends and neighbors who are going to come from barrier islands and other locations, they're taking a chance that they may ride out that storm with you, but then they're not going to be allowed back if they decide to leave and say, I want to go look around the area. Well, you might not get back in to where you had a comfortable place. So those are some of the key things that you have to take a look at too.
Yeah, I would say that the People with Special Needs program the county does work. This is where getting the word out to your residents and getting them to fill out the forms if they're planning to stay there, if they don't have someone that can come and take them somewhere else. Last September, I was the president of my condo there, and I got designated to stay with one of our residents until such time as they picked her up. And she thought, oh, well, they said they're going to be here at 8 o'clock. Well, she didn't hear too well. They said they would be there between 8 and 5 p.m. on this Saturday. And so she was all ready to go at 8 o'clock, and why aren't they here, and why aren't they there? And so it's patience. And then they finally came, and then the point was they bring in this big school bus, and who's going to direct them to get to that unit? So it does make sense if you have someone with special needs, they can be registered, they're scheduled to be picked up, is making sure, if not a staff, that there's a condo representative that's on the contact list that they can then direct the people to come and help them out and get them into the bus and so forth. So,
yeah, and one thing that we did with that is throughout the year we maintained a list of all the caretakers and their numbers for everybody, and we kept in contact with them the whole week leading up to the hurricane, and we made them, you know, have them removed a day or two before the hurricane. That way they were in a building that if the power went out, there would be a backup generator in case they had any sort of machines that they needed, you know, day to day, that they would never lose that power, and they would have their correct health care. Because the area that we were in downtown St. Petersburg at the time, that building, there's a lot of streets that got blocked off by trees and down power lines and everything, and we couldn't get through certain areas for a couple days.
Yeah. John, what's your experience in?
At the Plaza at 5 Points, we're kind of high and dry. We're about 19 feet above sea level. It's a fairly new building, up to the Miami-Dade hurricane standards for 2002, I believe, which means the windows are category 3, and it was a pretty solid building. Our plan that we had, and every year we've updated it, found something new. You know, we have a service, Accutech had worked over a couple of years to put together a remediation plan. We did all the stuff we thought we needed to do, including getting lines of credit in case we needed money to do repairs to the building. He who has the cash, cash is king, gets the work done first. So we had it all planned, and I realized that there's going to be people that are going to stay. I offered staff a nice solid building to bring their family to. Luckily, most of my staff came, so we were there for probably 30, 40 hours. We staffed our front desk. You know, we had 3 people that can change shifts. Maintenance was there. We had the hurricane plan, and it says that when the fire department can't come out, shut your elevators down. So that's what we did, is we shut the elevators off so that somebody doesn't get stuck in the elevator and spend a long time until the winds die down and the fire department can come get them out. So lucky for me, my son's a firefighter paramedic for Sarasota County, a block away, and he says, okay, we're standing down. And I said, all right, let's shut the elevators off. So we kept them open as long as we could. You know, had Matt and his family join us.
Yeah.
The guy.
I did. Even the insurance guy was over at 5 points.
The gentleman who worked for the developer that built it, he designed a lot of the building. He brought his family there. So anyway, I knew I was in a safe place if they were there. And, but we were there and available to help. But the problem is that we had a lot, like I said, people came from the barrier islands. There was elderly people there that had things going worse, would have been in a world of hurt. They needed to be where there's doctors and you know, generators and things like that. But the one thing that I learned over the years is I see a lot of property managers here. We have rules and regulations that we have to enforce. People ignore them. So when you put out your notices and this and that, you'll tell them and they'll hear you and they'll say okay and they'll do whatever the hell they want. So the thing is, you have to be prepared. And we were prepared, but I wasn't fully prepared for all the people that showed up at the door. As a matter of fact, we had to close our rolling gates down for the parking garage because all the neighborhood people wanted to park their cars up off the ground. So,
All right,
yeah.
thank you, John. Rick, John brings up a good point there about having a line of credit, but isn't it rather expensive, especially if you go a number of years without ever needing it? So what's the association to do to be prepared financially?
You're exactly right. I mean, a line of credit, you should have a line of credit. However, there's a cost to a line of credit because what a lot of people don't realize is that to a bank, a line of credit is the same thing as having a loan on its books. The bank has to do annual monitoring, you have to set it up, you have to pay all the costs to the government, the taxes, everything on that promissory note. Whether you ever touch it or not, you're going to pay the cost of a line of credit. So a lot of associations that we deal with say, well, we want it for $300,000, $400,000 to meet our deductible, and when we tell them what the costs are, well, the costs are $7,000, something like that. They say, well, we don't want that because we don't know if we're ever going to use it. Valid point, right? So what we do is we've created a system that's a little bit different. We do a two-step process with an emergency line of credit. We put in place a small line of credit day one that is accessed by the association immediately upon an event for getting the cleanup folks in, getting the property stabilized, whatnot. It allows everybody, the team, the emergency team, to evaluate the damage and figure out what is the approximate cost going to be, how much money do they need to fix this, and how do they want to repay a loan. Then, once a bank has that, it's real easy. And the association knows that they're going to use the money. The cost that they incur for the next $500,000 million loan to cover the deductible or repairs, they will actually get a benefit from paying those costs. So we've sort of put together a hybrid. We find that it's working pretty well. But another thing that I would say also is not all lines of credit are the same. As an association, if you have an operating line of credit that can just be tapped into for whatever, for temporary shortfalls, this, that, and the other, you need to look at your documents to make sure there's not a clause in there that is the lender deems itself insecure clause. Because what that is, and it's typically in line of credit documents, and what it means is the lender can avoid funding. The lender can say no. If a storm comes through, 25% of your property is gone, the lender may very well say, well, I'm not going to let you touch that. Look, your property's destroyed. So what we do on ours is we make sure that we don't have the lender deems itself insecure on the small line of credit so that you really can access that in the event of a disaster. Does that make sense?
I want to add to that.
Yeah. Thank you. That's
Can I add to
a
that
very
as well?
valid point to understand.
I want to add to that. Line of credit is really important. John mentioned it. If you take Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Matthew, taking 5 points for example, 5 points has roughly $1 million deductible. So they're on the hook for the first $1 million of loss. Another important reason to have a line of credit is or a contingency fund is for the unbudgeted losses under the deductible. And having that in place for landscaping, debris removal is going to be very key after a loss where you do not pierce your deductible. And I just wanted to add that.
Good point there. You mentioned landscaping, so I know our condo, we had a lot of palm trees and some of those got knocked down or blown over or leaning against something, and one of our landscaping vendors said, oh, no problem, we'll just get you to come out and remove those, and because it's a hurricane, you don't need a city tree removal permit, right? And I found out later that was not true. Todd, can you fill us in on what the city's requirements are when you're under emergency declaration on tree removal?
Yes, typically what we'll do is there'll be several different types of repairs. For those repairs that are storm related, whether it's roof, windows, doors, trees, you still need to pull a permit. And we will waive those permit fees. That's typically what we will do. What we also do is we prioritize. So let's say it was just right after Irma and Bill's Pool Service wanted to come and build somebody a pool. Well, no, you just wait because we're dealing with all the priority permits from people dealing with storm damage. And then we will let you know when you can come file your permit. So, you know, we will prioritize everything on the most readily needs that are needed by the citizens, and we will waive the permit fees as what we do.
It was my understanding that that waiver of the permit fees is occurring while the city or county is under emergency declaration. So I noticed that the city had an emergency declaration like Thursday before Irma, and then had to go back and renew it the following week. And so that, when you hear that thing about they had an emergency declaration, it actually covers, I think, some of these issues of when these city staff can waive fees and stuff.
Yes, sir. What we do is when I think it's necessary to go to a state of emergency, I coordinate with Mr. Barwin, the city manager. He, by city code, needs to concur with at least one commissioner, and then we're under a state of emergency. It's for 1 week, and we continually renew it as long as we're dealing with that specific disaster. And then once we realize the magnitude of everything, that's why it's important to get out there and identify those damages that are related to the storm, so that when you need your permit, then we're still under those emergency conditions. I will typically say that if we stop the emergency conditions, because it also relates to a lot of the pay policies for the city personnel, we may stop that, but as long as our inspectors can readily identify that that is storm related, they're probably not going to impose the permit fee for you. Some of it will touch on gray areas and that they can be solved, but we may hit a couple of those spots, but we're always going to work with everybody.
No, do you have a follow-up?
I do. I've had several residents ask me this question, including my own wife. What happens to the cranes? We have two in the vicinity of 1350 now, only a couple blocks away. Are they secure once you declare a state of emergency, or how are they secure?
Once we recognize that the storms are coming and we know that we're in the path, we send our building officials out with the building inspectors, and they go to the different construction sites and let them know and make sure that they're well aware of the situation. For the cranes themselves, if they're the very tall, build the crane type thing, what they will do is they have a weather setting on those that they allow them to spin freely with the wind. Because if you were to lock them in place, that's when you're going to get the wind able to push them over on the side. So they will spin. The smaller cranes that you see sometimes on the streets, what they will do is they will lower those cranes down so that they're not in the way of anything.
Okay, any other folks here? Do we have any other questions from the audience here, if you will? We're just picking up cards there, so let's be sure you get a card filled out there, and we'll continue to follow here.
Okay. Waiting for a question?
You know, fill out a card, then we'll read them here. We don't have microphones to go around the audience for that. We're here.
Can I go back to an earlier?
Yeah, please, John.
Going back to liabilities, one of the areas, and again, developing our plan, the liability of the association on staff that does remain behind or assist during a hurricane. What liability does the association have for those employees who remain?
Depends. Is this after a mandatory evacuation has been issued? If a state of emergency has been declared and a mandatory evacuation has been issued and somebody decides to stay and you make the decision that everybody needs to leave and you tell everybody you need to leave, If they stay, you are completely immune from any liability under the emergency powers.
So as long as there's no demand or request or requirement that they stay behind, you're covered liability.
Yes.
Just to clarify that, we did have a question relating to the emergency declarations. As you mentioned, under the Florida statute 718-1265, the Association of Emergency Powers, the board has to, can adopt a resolution requiring people to leave or whatever. Do they need to do that for each occurrence when you're under an emergency situation, or can they just do it blanket-wide? What's the advice for the association boards?
You could do it blanket-wide. You could put it in your documents. You could put it in your rules and guidelines. I mean, if there's a written policy and everybody's aware of it, you're going to be fine. But you will need to have a process where if a state of emergency is declared, that you are putting everybody on notice. Hey, a state of emergency has been declared, and we are requiring the complete evacuation of the property. I mean, if you don't tell them, then they don't know, then there's probably going to be some gray area where we weren't notified. But if you put out a mass email or however it is that you're communicating with your people, and they choose not to leave, then that's 100% on them.
So then they are notifying the individuals that by staying after the declaration has been made and the board has adopted that, they are accepting personal liability and the association is no longer liable, right? Has no longer have liability. Is that correct?
Yes. Okay. And you know, this woman in front is asking, can you force somebody to leave? No. No. I mean, you can try, but...
what happens to that person as a result of staying there?
Well, it's their own responsibility.
You can't cure stupid. So.
Yeah, we have some questions here related to the insurance, and there was something mentioned earlier about when you're bringing in, having contractors ahead of time and so forth. What is it in insurance or in a remediation about assignment of benefits? I don't know, Darren, can you handle that?
Well, assignment of benefits, that's a hot subject right now. I would say this. There's a time and a place for assignment of benefits. If you don't know your contractor, if you don't have a relationship, I wouldn't sign an assignment of benefits. All that does is it gives the contractor the same rights as a homeowner or an association as related to that claim. But if you don't know the contractor and they're not going to use that for what it's designed for, I wouldn't sign it. What it does entail, if you have a large loss, you have a $2 million fire, and you want the insurance carrier, not the agents. The agents want to get your properties fixed. The carriers sometimes have delays, and there might be a liability issue going on. So this, if it's a fire, this could drag on, and I had one that they didn't decide liability for 2.5 years. Assignment of benefits will give a contractor the ability to go ahead and self-fund the dollar amount that they're secure with. We went $500,000 on a project knowing we were going to get paid. There was a $1 million policy in place, and a Home Depot sub burned a building down, and Home Depot has pretty good insurance, so we felt pretty secure. But without that, a project that took 11 months and 7 homeowners were back in would have probably been 2.5 to 3 years. So if you, as a contractor, if you wouldn't give me the key to your clubhouse, don't sign an assignment of benefits. And if you sign an assignment of benefits, make sure it's being used. There's companies that'll say, never sign an assignment of benefits as contractor. They use that as a selling point. That's because they don't have the ability to use it. If they're not going to self-fund and move your project forward, then there's no reason for you to sign an assignment of benefits.
And what I would add too, you need to have a restoration contractor already in place prior to any disaster or any potential storm going out there. If you wait till the last minute, you're gonna get what you paid for. So just know that. That's really important. If you don't have somebody already, get one.
And you also want to read your assignment of benefits. I know that sounds silly, but what I've seen is where you assign a certain amount to the contractor, and there's a clause in there that's usually smaller, it's not bolded or anything, and it says, to the extent that we exceed the benefits allowed, you are responsible, and then they're going to come looking for you. And now Darren's extremely reputable, so he would never do it, but there are contractors who say, oh, yeah, we went $50,000 over what it should have cost, and you're responsible. And then you're on the hook and you're going to get into a battle with them over that. So you want to make sure that you read all of these documents, and I would argue have your lawyer look over everything before you sign it.
Yeah, Matthew,
Just a quick follow-up with that. On the assignment of benefits, if you're signing one, and definitely have your attorney look it over, the contract for your loss should read, because I've had people say, well, what's our estimate? You have a big fire job going on. Your estimate should be your deductible, and the guarantee in that contract that your property will be restored to pre-loss condition. And exactly what Derek said, there should be $0 amount over that. The contractor, when he takes the assignment of benefits, should be willing to redo your project. If he doesn't get paid from the insurance company, and that's the way our contracts read, it does not go back on the association. So definitely have an attorney look it over if somebody can't look and make sure the clause is not in there.
yeah, we had a couple of questions from the audience here related to the insurance issues. So how to insure against the loss from trees, shrubs, landscaping? Is that typically covered, or is that
You have minimum,
special?
yeah, you have minimum coverage in your policy currently. Depending on the carrier, you can get higher limits. Now, there is a program out there, and I've seen it, I've mostly seen it on the East Coast, where they'll cover landscaping at a $500 deductible, but that product, and it also covers trees, shrubs, all that good stuff. That product, if you read the fine print, does not get triggered unless you have a category 2. So there are products out there where you can get full coverage for your landscaping, trees, but no, read the small print before you sign the contract.
Another insurance-related one is coverage based upon the ratings of the windows in the building. In other words, if the windows are rated at a hurricane level 3, can the insurance company provide coverage for hurricanes of category 4 or 5?
Good question. They're gonna replace it with lifetime quality, at the end of the day. So whatever you had there before, they're not gonna, unless you have ordinance and law coverage in place, and it could cover that exposure. Ordinance and law covers increased cost of construction after a loss. And that's something that if you don't already have in place, if you're an older building, you need to have ordinance and law coverage. If you take the Wayback Machine 8 years ago, it was a coverage that was really hard to buy. Now, in most cases, we can negotiate higher limits and no extra cost. So increased cost of construction, which is covered C, under ordinance and law, maybe would come into play to get your windows up to code.
Matt, I just want to add that real quick because it's important to know. Florida Statute 718 dictates that the insurance carrier and the way your appraisal goes, they are only going to replace, when we're talking about replacement costs, they are going to replace the building based on the original design and blueprint of the building. Any type of additions, alterations, betterments, improvements, code enforcement has to be covered under the ordinance and law endorsement under the policy. So it's really important that you have adequate ordinance and law, because no, the statute dictates they are going to replace it based on the original design, blueprint, and the features of like, kind, and quality based on original construction. That is a fact.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, ordinance and law is key. We can't stress that enough. That's my partner, Jimmy. And you have to look at ordinance and law coverage every year.
Okay, go ahead. Follow up.
I just want to just add real quick for the homeowners. When they come out and they're going to replace and they're going to rebuild your condominium, they're going to be doing it, like Jimmy said, back to the way that it was originally constructed. Okay, so if you're a homeowner, it's a good idea, and I'll let them touch on this later, but you should also have homeowners insurance, because what they're going to do is they're going to replace the walls, the flooring, and things like that, but they're not going to replace your carpet, they're not going to replace your hardwood floors, they're not going to replace your personal property and things like that. When they're rebuilding that structure, that's what they're talking about, just the structure. So you definitely need to think about, okay, yeah, I've got hurricane-proof windows, but if all this flooding comes in and it gets through all this, I'm still responsible.
Well, we haven't really talked about, and I think it's worth noting, is you really need to have what I think is called a disaster recovery team in place. And who are the members of that team? Really, it should be property manager, your banker for access to money, your insurance agent, your attorney, your emergency cleanup and restoration company, engineer. All those people really need to be on the team, because what really, the event occurs, X number of days after the event, you have a team meeting on site. Everybody, each one of those members of that team is there. Your banker, and I'm not saying they're not companies, they're people. You need to get a hold of Rick. How are you gonna get a hold of Rick? What's his cell phone number? Not the bank's number, because you may not be able to get a hold of anybody at the bank. So you need to have the people, and how are you gonna get a hold of the people on the team?
What's been the experience of some of the other condos in terms of your review process from your hurricane preparedness plans?
We're currently actually creating beyond what we originally had, and we found within our documents some issues within our documents. You talked earlier about moving vehicles, and that's some language that was in our documents that we're removing based on guidance from our attorney, that it was bad guidance to have that language in there. So just in the act of reviewing, a lot of the documentation that's went around since we started putting this together, it all kind of coincides with what we did, but now we're putting it into writing, and as we do that, we're noticing some things in our documents that need to be out of there. So it's been a great exercise, and I think if nothing else, Irma was a perfect opportunity for a lot of buildings in this area to review those things, but it's we're much wiser than we were a year ago.
Brian, you had a follow-up?
I think one thing that we learned after last year that is going into the hurricane preparedness for this year is all the information on the generator. How long is it going to last? How big is the tank? What is actually run on the generator? Everything that's run, do we need it? What things do we have to have on the generator? So we've been working with the city and engineers in the generator company to try to figure out that information. Because the big question that kept coming up is, if they lose power, are they going to be able to use the toilets? So checking with the city to see how long their systems go on, their generator lasts afterwards to get the lines flushing, and that was one thing that we found was very important into this process.
We started years ago, little by little, putting together a management team, some board members. The insurance, Matt was very helpful with the insurance. We had the remediation team, met with them for a few years. It's an ongoing process because until you have an event, you really don't know what you're going to need. And the residents, they really weren't too interested up until last year. As you can tell, we have a full house. But the thing is, it's an ongoing process, and you have to stay up with everything. Every time you have people move in, you need to get their information, emergency call list. As people are aging, they have different illnesses or problems, and when we see it, we kind of put our nose where we don't belong and ask them to fill out a sheet to help them. But it's not something you do right before the storm. This is something you do on a regular basis.
Yes, there's a lot of maintenance issues there. I know, Frank, you had mentioned something about pumps and elevators. Is there some practical experience you had in terms of what needs to get shut down so that you can recover more quickly?
Well, the experience was from 04, 05, when we had all those hurricanes with 4 each summer. And I was working in senior living, so we had to go to the East Coast to assist with them. A lot of facilities left all their 3-phase equipment, pumps, motors running. They left their elevators running. They left their generators running during the hurricane. And when you're having your power fluctuations, that takes a hard toll on this equipment. And what they discovered was, the power went out. Well, once the winds went over 35 and everything was running and the power was fluctuating, they weren't realizing it, but they had lost their pumps, they had lost their motors, they had lost several pieces of equipment, they had lost elevators. The power went out, and now their generator's running during the hurricane, and the same thing's happening. You've got all these fluctuations in power. They had generators where they ran so long that the exhaust went through the roof, roofs caught on fire, alternators went out, they lost starters. So now the hurricane's gone, they have no electricity, they have no generator, they have nothing. And let's just say the power comes back on in a day or 2 or 3 days later, then they discover they have no elevator, they have no pumps, they have no motors, and now, of course, after a disaster like that, you have no vendors available, you have no replacement parts, which just prolongs the period of the misery. And, to wake up and get out of bed and be in sopping wet floors in high humidity with just terrible stench from the heat and the mustiness of it, and then to throw in the fact that you don't have anything operating, It's very difficult. So you want to plan, your best plan is for how you want to live after the hurricane. Obviously, you want to be in a safe location, live through it, but then after the hurricane, you want to make sure that you're able to, you want to make the best accommodations for yourself that you can for at least a week with no provisions whatsoever. No electric, no gas, no water, and how are you going to survive? And in a condo situation, as a manager, I feel that it's my responsibility to make sure that I do all of that because I feel a personal responsibility for each unit owner in the building.
I just ask a question. If we don't have enough power, does a remediation company come in? Do you have generators that you bring in to operate your equipment? If you need dryers or dehumidifiers or pumps or whatever?
We do. So we'll bring in, and that's part of the emergency planning, is we're going to know already how many generators, how many, like we have 6 semi-mounted desiccants, how many desiccants it's going to take to dry out your building. But the key note to that is the generators that we bring in, because there's been a misconception, I've had people say, excellent, so you're bringing generators, we'll have our air conditioning. You will not have your air conditioning off of our generators. Just the fuel consumption in that, and that's why it's in emergency services and why you want to have good insurance. You can go through $8,000 to $10,000 a day in fuel, just depending on the size of your building, for us just to dry it out. That's for remediation. That's to stop the damage as quick as we can. So, yes, a large company would have their own, but not for AC.
And one of the keys to that, as far as your generators and your elevators and saving those for after the hurricane, is through experience on the East Coast. A lot of senior living, 911 was called, and they're on the 4th or 5th floor, and you have no elevator. Once the fire department 911 came out after 2 times, they were going to make that building be evacuated. Now you have to evacuate an entire building full of people with no power, no elevators, no nothing, because the fire department's not coming out anymore to go up the stairs and save the people.
Yeah, some issues there. We had another question that came up about back on the financial reserves, financial having a line of credit. Rick, is an option of simply tapping your reserve funds if you need to handle some of the damage for that versus having a line of credit?
That is an option if you can do that per your documents. So that is something to ask your attorney or whomever. And we recommend all of our associations that if that is not an option, that you build that option in, that you make sure that you have the ability to tap 100% of your operating funds or reserve funds for any emergency that you may have.
But you said that's something that has to be approved and notified in your documents that says you have that legal capability, right?
Unless if, Derek? So you're the attorney.
Yes. Do they automatically have ability to use reserve funds for an emergency, or does it need to be in their documents?
No, if you look at the emergency powers that you're granted under the statute, you have the ability to levy special assessments, spend money. I mean, you're pretty much under those special powers. While they're in effect, you're allowed to do a great many things. So I would take a look at that statute. Again, you do have a fiduciary responsibility to the association, so you don't want to go wild, but you do have the ability to go ahead and spend whatever it is you need to spend to make sure that you're protecting the condominium so that not more damage is done.
That's a good point. We had some questions here about how best to be notified during emergency situations, how that's laid out in your plans. You talked about needing to update the plan to be sure you had a current list of individuals and vendors here. In terms of notification of owners, what has been some of the practices for getting the messages out, either through email or if there are people who are in units? What's been the experience in terms of notifying residents?
Well, we find that you better have more than one method to get the word out. We have a website, we have email, we have a phone list, we have text message. We use it all. People, for some reason, just don't try not to send a lot of stuff out so that when you do, they'll say, "Oh, this must be important." So that's been my policy, but yeah, we've got to do everything we do until we reach the individuals. Because sometimes we have to get hold of them and tell them, you've got stuff left out on your balcony, and we got a hurricane coming, and you need to find a way to get it off your balcony. So, you know, they're told over and over and over, but sometimes they don't necessarily listen. But yes, we find a way to get hold of them.
Okay. Todd, we had a couple of questions here going back on the shelter situation, both in terms of pet-friendly shelters and also where you have an elderly person. Where would somebody get that information now? Is that the city maintains, or is that the county website? What's the best place for finding that information?
Two different points there. I'll touch on the pets first. All the shelters are going to be pet-friendly now. So it doesn't matter which shelter you go to, they will be taking pets. Now, it may be ended up being limited on the number of pets, and they say, we're full for pets, you may need to go to a different shelter where there's still room for those pets. But they're making accommodations. Right now in Sarasota County, they will have, it's 11 this year because one of the schools' cafeteria is being rebuilt. So next year it'll be 12, but there'll be 11 shelters throughout the county. The school board's doing a great job going through, reassessing all the engineering behind it, and reassessing just how many people can they truly put there in each shelter.
Is the list ready?
The list, I believe, is on the county website. One of the things to understand under state statute, the county is responsible for sheltering. The city has no responsibility, and it's not to say that we don't want that responsibility. It's by statute the county has to do it. So we work in partnership with the county, but we are not in charge of the shelters by state statute. If you go to the county's website and look under the emergency services, if it's not up yet, I know it will be very soon for the shelters throughout the county that will be open. And again, all will be pet friendly. All are supposed to have medical representation there in some shape, manner, or form. Now, whether that's 1 or 2 paramedics, or that's a couple of law enforcement officers with AEDs and first aid, the school nurses, the school board's doing a great job of getting more involved with providing shelter staff. Now, for the medical needs program, you must go to the county to register for that program also, and that is available on their website. It may still say people with special needs program, but that's where you will go. They are in a process of changing those forms, so I can't tell you that if you go there tomorrow it's going to be accurate and up to date. But the simplest thing to do when you're talking with the county is to call the 861-5000 number. That's the county operators. They have hundreds of free questions. They look those up, find you the answers. They can mail you the forms from there, or they can put you in direct contact with someone in the county who has that specific answer. Like again, it has been in the process of changing. Exactly when those changes are going to go to the public, I do not know.
And Todd, in terms of the shelters, I know last September they opened a couple, not knowing what the severity would be, and then as they went on, they opened a few more. Is that the current plan going forward, or are they going to?
No, sir. When it comes to opening the shelters, they are opening all of them at the same time. That created a lot of confusion. I can tell you, we were inundated with phone calls at the police department of, well, when are you going to open Sarasota High School? Well, the county's not going to open Sarasota High School. We had well over 100 people in the neighborhood who were lined up in Tuttle Elementary just waiting for them to open Tuttle. And fortunately, one of our officers on their way to work saw them waiting and was able to communicate with them, no, this is not going to be a shelter, you need to go to Booker High School. So it's, all will be open this year now, all at the exact same time. Now, it's not to say that after the storm passes and this particular school only had 50 people in it, that they're not going to provide you transportation to go to another shelter. That way they can get them back and get the schools cleaner quicker.
Okay, Matt, you have a follow-up here?
Yeah, it's actually for Todd. Can you discuss the search program? Is that still in play, and what community associations can do from a training standpoint for their board members? I know Ed preaches that. I don't know if it's still around.
The county in the past has done a CERT program. It's Citizens Emergency Response Team. It is a good program. There are some caveats to it that, having the appropriate people there, I can tell you one time I went out to do a training evaluation and there was an elderly lady who was pulling an oxygen tank, and I'm like, not really the person who should be learning the first aid training. And that's not a knock to anybody, that's just to say that, but the other parts of the training were good for her as far as the organization of how you organize your teams and those things. But also, just be prepared with that it's filling, it goes back to the old thing that Jim Lay at the county used to talk about, getting the right people on the bus and then getting them the right seat on the bus. So you have to remember that, portions of the education, I'm a lifelong learner, that's how I believe. Always learn, 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 and you can get things done. But it doesn't mean that you're going to be capable of doing everything in the program.
Okay. We have a couple of questions. Let me just quickly follow up here. A couple of questions here for kind of the recovery period there. This one is for Curtis Snell Engineering. What can a contradictory engineering report do to association after the storm has passed and the claim is denied by the insurance carrier?
That's an interesting question because that just happened to us recently on a project. So that can be detrimental. It really can be. Not that engineers should have a goal that they're going out to prepare the reporting, but oftentimes there can be differing opinions on what the root cause of a certain problem is. So we just had a project where the engineer provided by the insurance company came out and said it was a problem that had nothing to do with the hurricane that had come through 2 days before. The building had been in operation fine for 10 years prior, no issues, but the hurricane came through and they said, no, it had nothing to do with that. And we came out there and felt very strongly otherwise. And we're able to get them, what was that final number?
$50,000.
So it went from being $0 funded to $50,000. It wasn't a lot of time, it wasn't a lot of effort, but it was something that we felt differently. And we're able to put that in the report. So
Curtis, if also on the, you said windows and for both the damage and then the leaks or water coming in. So if an owner wanted to replace their windows ahead of time, what's the impact if the other owners in the building choose not to replace their windows? What's the benefit of going ahead and doing that for your own unit versus those that are above you?
There's a couple. If that's the one that's going to get hit with something, then everyone else can thank you. If you're the one unit owner that gets replaced. Obviously, the three testing standards that those windows go through are large missile impact, small missile impact, and then water and air infiltration. And what happens is those happen, the large missile happens, and then it's supposed to keep water and air out. So the idea being that it's going to break, we understand that it's going to break, but if that unit owner replaced theirs and that's the one that gets hit by a large or small missile and has that rating, and is able to withstand both the air and water infiltration, that doesn't impact either their unit or compromise the pressures in the building for other unit owners, because one of the things that you do not do is you don't open windows during the high wind event. What you can do is cause pressure variations that can break out windows and units across the building. It has nothing to do with anything other than geometries and passageway of air and air dynamics through the building. So it's a complicated, hard thing to understand, and it doesn't always have a rhyme or reason. You just don't open the windows, even if they're not impact rating. You give yourself the best chance of not blowing out any of them by having them all closed, especially if there's not going to be anything that happens. But if one unit owner replaces them, it's one that gets hit, and you can keep the pressure constant in the building, which is really important. I'm sure you stood next to the windows maybe in a high wind event, you can hear it start to move or creak a little bit. That's good, that's what they're supposed to do, that's not a bad thing. When the glass breaks and the window is no longer there, that's a bad thing. But you want it to move and give a little bit. So.
So Darren, you were talking about some of the services there, and obviously last year with Irma, we kind of dodged the bullet on that one and weren't nearly as severe as other parts of the nation had to deal with there. But even if you have a pre-planned service, are all those capabilities going to be there if we have a really major storm come through?
Well, I think that's why you want to have a relationship with a contractor ahead of time. Just like us, if everybody in this room right now put up their hand and said, hey, Darren, we want your services, I'm going to have to tell a lot of you no. And that's the thing to be careful of. Some contractors will use this as a marketing tool to say, hey, if the big storm comes, we're going to protect you. And that's something you want to look at. How many people, how many associations out on the island are they taking care of? Because if they come and say, yeah, we're taking care of 10 of them, that's not going to happen. And how large is the company? You know, it's not that having the biggest company is the best, but if you have a large company that does a lot of business, because it's not just what we can do, it's what can our suppliers do. You know, the roofing companies that we deal with, that we spend millions of dollars a year with, if you need a roof, I can call them and say, I need a roof. And it's going to happen a lot quicker. So, you know, capability, there's nobody in Sarasota County that can take care of everybody in Sarasota County. So you need to actually do your due diligence, find out have they done large successful programs before, are you comfortable with them? But if you run into one contractor, and we have 102 employees and I can only do a certain amount, if you have one company that has 20 associations signed up, understand that they're not coming to you. They'll come to one of you, and then 19 of you are going to be very sad. So I would definitely do the due diligence on it.
Okay, thank you. We're going to need to wrap up here. We've got sponsors here that will be giving away our gifts here. I do have one last question more as a wrap up here. Was asked about how do we enable better communication among, especially among the condo property managers and condo boards. And I will say from the Downtown Sarasota Condo Association, we revamped our website a couple years ago and created a members-only area. And on there we have our member representatives from the condos, but we also have on there most of the property managers and can post notices, and that's an opportunity for sharing. And I will say that the DSCA has a safety committee, and I mentioned that earlier, that last year that safety committee led an effort to gather together some of the lessons learned from Irma. And so that's a mechanisms we have for those who have an interest, who want some follow-up, can get together with our safety committee, but also through the property managers, we can make use of the shared communications through our website to post information. I would even suggest that if those individuals or property managers want to post copies of the preparedness plans, we could use our safety committees to kind of share that information around there. And so I want to again thank everyone for being here, and all the, if you would help me give a round of applause for our two panelists.